Hello, everyone. Welcome to Daily Storyteller, and today I'm here to help you sleep. So before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Part 1. The year was 2019, and three friends, Megan, Josh, and Rebecca, decided to escape the noise of their busy city lives. They found a remote cabin online, deep in the heart of Montana's dense forests. The listing promised complete serenity, untouched nature, and a chance to reconnect with yourself. Megan, a freelance artist, saw this as an opportunity to finish a long overdue project. Josh, the jokester and a marketing executive, was desperate to detox from his screen-filled life. Rebecca, a nurse, just wanted a break from the endless hours at the hospital. The cabin's owner, Mr. Eldridge, had communicated via email. His instructions were peculiar. Arrive before sundown, bring enough supplies, as the nearest store is over 20 miles away. He ended his email with, "The cabin has a history, but don't let that scare you. The key is under the old flower pot by the porch." On the drive, they laughed about the ominous tone of the email. Josh joked, "It's like the start of a bad horror movie, isn't it? The key is under the flower pot, and the ghosts are waiting inside." But Megan, always skeptical, shrugged it off, muttering, "People say anything to sound mysterious." The sun began to set as they arrived. The cabin was exactly as described, quaint, isolated, and surrounded by towering pines, but there was something about it that felt off. The inside of the cabin was surprisingly cozy. Rustic furniture, an old stone fireplace, and shelves filled with dusty books gave it charm. Yet there was a peculiar smell, faint, metallic, and unsettling. "Probably the pipes," Josh said dismissively. They unpacked their things and lit a fire. As night fell, the forest outside came alive with sounds, owls hooting, leaves rustling, and the faint howl of a distant animal. Rebecca found a journal on the coffee table. It looked old, its leather cover cracked with age. Inside were scrawled entries, the handwriting messy and frantic. "I hear them again. Every night they get closer. The scratching on the walls won't stop. They want me to leave, or worse." "Okay, that's creepy," Rebecca said, closing the journal. Josh laughed nervously. "Just someone trying to mess with the guests. Smart marketing, if you ask me." The unease settled in as they went to bed. Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that the journal wasn't a joke. Around 2 a.m., Megan woke to the sound of footsteps outside. She froze, listening intently. The steps were deliberate, heavy, and circled the cabin. She whispered to Rebecca, who was sleeping on the other bed, "Rebecca, wake up." Rebecca stirred, her eyes heavy with sleep. "What is it?" "Listen." The footsteps stopped. Josh barged into their room. "Did you guys hear that?" His voice, usually steady and mocking, was shaky. They huddled together, listening. The forest was silent, too silent. Even the usual rustle of leaves and chirp of crickets had ceased. Suddenly there was a loud thump on the porch. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped. Josh grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the front door. The beam of light fell on the porch. Nothing. "Must have been an animal," he muttered, though his voice betrayed doubt. The next morning, Megan decided to explore the surroundings. As she walked around the back of the cabin, she saw something strange. A small, overgrown graveyard. The tombstones were ancient, their inscriptions barely legible. One stone caught her eye. It read, "Eldridge family. Taken too soon. 1927. Megan felt a chill creep up her spine. Inside, Rebecca was flipping through more pages of the journal. One entry stood out, "The Eldridge family. They didn't just die, they were taken. The cabin doesn't belong to the living. If you're reading this, leave now." When Megan shared her discovery, Josh's face turned pale. "Wait, Eldridge, isn't that the name of the owner?" The cabin's peaceful facade was unraveling. As night fell, the terror began. The footsteps returned louder this time. Shadows moved just beyond the windows, but when they shined a light, nothing was there. Josh tried to call for help, but there was no signal. The landline in the cabin was dead. Then came the scratching. It started on the walls, faint at first, then grew more frantic. Rebecca screamed as a window shattered. Through the broken glass, they saw it, an impossibly tall figure, its face hidden in darkness, staring at them. "Run!" Megan yelled. They scrambled to the car, but the tires were slashed. The figure didn't chase them. It simply stood by the cabin, watching. At dawn, they gathered their courage to return and retrieve their belongings. But when they reached the cabin, it looked untouched. No broken window, no journal. Only the graveyard remained with a new stone. It read, Megan, Josh, Rebecca. Gone but not forgotten. Part 2. It was the summer of 2017, a time when everyone seemed obsessed with escaping into nature. For James, Ellie, and their mutual friend Darren, the idea of camping deep in the woods felt like the perfect way to unplug from their hectic lives. James, a software engineer, was the planner of the group. He had meticulously mapped out their route to a remote camping site in the Appalachian Mountains. Ellie, a free-spirited photographer, was excited about capturing the untouched beauty of the forest. Darren, the comic relief, brought energy and jokes to lighten the mood. Though he had little experience outdoors, the trip began with excitement. They drove for hours, the roads narrowing as they entered the dense forest. Finally, they parked their car at the designated trailhead and hiked for 2 hours to reach their camping spot. The site was idyllic, surrounded by towering trees and a stream that sparkled in the afternoon sun. As they set up their tents, James couldn't help but feel proud of his choice. "Told you this would be perfect," he said with a grin. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest took on a different character. The shadows deepened, and the once comforting sounds of birds and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence. The three friends gathered around the campfire, sharing laughs and marshmallows. Darren told a ridiculous story about his disastrous date the week before, earning groans from Ellie and James. "All right, bedtime," James announced, stifling a yawn. As they settled into their tents, Ellie noticed something odd, a strange rhythmic tapping sound coming from the woods. She brushed it off as the wind and drifted to sleep. In the middle of the night, Ellie woke suddenly. The tapping was louder now, closer. She unzipped her tent slightly and peered out. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows. Then she saw it, something moving between the trees. It was quick, almost too fast to register. "James?" she whispered, her voice trembling. James groaned from his tent. "What is it?" "Something's out there." Darren's voice cut through the tension. "It's probably an animal. Go back to sleep, Ellie." But Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The next morning, the group decided to explore the woods. Ellie shared what she had seen, but Darren waved it off. "Probably a deer. You're just spooking yourself." As they ventured deeper into the forest, James noticed something strange. The trees around them bore deep claw-like marks, as though something massive had torn through the bark. "What do you think did this?" he asked, his voice uneasy. Ellie snapped a photo, but even through the lens, the scene felt wrong. "Maybe a bear?" she offered, though she didn't sound convinced. Darren laughed nervously. "Yeah, sure, a bear with an axe." But the humor didn't last long. Just ahead, they found an old cabin. It was weathered and overgrown, hidden by the dense foliage. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking with the breeze. "We should check it out," Darren said, his curiosity piqued. "I don't think that's a good idea," James replied, but Darren was already walking toward the door. Inside, the air was thick and musty. Dust covered the furniture and strange symbols were carved into the walls. On the table, they found a single object, a wooden figurine of a man, its face contorted in a scream. "That's creepy," Ellie muttered, her skin crawling. James grabbed Darren's arm. "Let's go, now." As night fell, the group couldn't shake the unease from their discovery. The tapping sound returned, louder than before, echoing through the trees. Ellie huddled closer to the fire. "It's not the wind. That sound, it's deliberate." James nodded. "We're leaving at first light." Darren, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Maybe it's the forest telling us to leave." The joke fell flat. Around midnight, the tapping grew erratic, almost frantic. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like the wind through leaves, but soon they became clearer, murmured words in a language none of them recognized. The fire flickered and dimmed, as though the darkness was swallowing the light. "Stay close," James whispered. Suddenly a branch snapped nearby. The friends froze as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a tattered hood. Ellie screamed. The figure raised a hand pointing directly at them. "Run!" James shouted, pulling Ellie and Darren toward the trail. The forest seemed alive, branches clawing at them as they ran. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. Darren tripped and fell. "Go!" he yelled, but James and Ellie stopped to help him. The figure was closer now, its movements unnatural, as though it glided rather than walked. They reached the trailhead and piled into the car, hearts pounding. James turned the key. The engine roared to life and they sped away, the figure disappearing into the distance. Back in the safety of their apartment, the three friends tried to make sense of what had happened, but every time Ellie looked at the photos she had taken, the images appeared distorted, as though the forest itself was trying to erase their memory. Months later, Ellie read an article about the Appalachian woods. It detailed local legends of a spirit that haunted those who disturbed its land. She shivered as she recognized the symbols from the cabin. The friends never went camping again. Part 3. It was the winter of 2015, and Jack needed extra cash. He had picked up a temporary job at an old distribution warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover his overdue rent. Jack was 28, a college dropout trying to piece his life back together. The warehouse wasn't exactly inviting, dimly lit, with walls stained by years of neglect. The staff worked in shifts, but tonight it was just Jack and a security guard named Greg. Greg, in his late 40s, was a gruff man who spoke only when necessary. He spent most of his time in the security booth near the front entrance, leaving Jack to handle the warehouse floor. Jack's task for the night was simple: organize a shipment of crates and make sure the inventory matched the delivery log. But there was one thing his supervisor had warned him about earlier. "Stay out of Section C," the man had said. "We don't use that part of the warehouse anymore." Jack hadn't asked why. He figured it was just old equipment or hazardous materials. The night started uneventfully. Jack wheeled crates around, checked labels, and adjusted his headphones. The faint hum of machinery and the occasional clang of metal filled the vast empty space. Around midnight he heard it, a faint noise coming from Section C. It was subtle at first, like a soft tapping. Jack paused his music and listened. The sound grew louder. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Curiosity got the better of him. Jack grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the forbidden section. The air grew colder as he approached. The lights in Section C flickered, casting eerie shadows. The tapping stopped. "Greg?" Jack called out, his voice echoing. No response, just the oppressive silence. Jack shook his head. "Must be the pipes," he muttered, trying to convince himself. He returned to his work, but the feeling of being watched lingered. By 2 a.m., Jack was restless. The noises had returned, and now they sounded like whispers. Faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Jack decided to confront Greg. He walked to the security booth, but it was empty. Greg's chair was turned over, and his flashlight lay on the ground. "Greg?" Jack called again, his voice tinged with panic. He noticed something strange, a trail of footprints leading away from the booth. They were wet, as if someone had walked through water, but there was no water anywhere in the warehouse. The footprints led to Section C. Jack hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, but something compelled him to follow. With trembling hands, he grabbed Greg's flashlight and stepped into Section C. The air was thick and heavy. The rows of shelves were covered in dust, untouched for years. At the end of the aisle, he saw a door slightly ajar. Inside, he found an old office. Papers were scattered across the floor, and the walls were lined with filing cabinets. But what caught his attention was a large rusted safe in the corner. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Jack felt an inexplicable need to open the safe. He turned the dial, and to his surprise, it clicked open easily. Inside was a stack of old photographs. They showed people, workers by the looks of it, but their faces were scratched out, leaving only faint outlines. In the last photo, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. It was the warehouse floor, but standing in the center was a tall, shadowy figure. Jack stumbled back, clutching the photos. The whispers turned into a deafening roar. He ran out of the office, but the moment he stepped into the aisle, he froze. The shadowy figure from the photograph stood at the other end of the aisle. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. "Greg?" Jack whispered, though he knew it wasn't him. The figure took a step forward, then another. Jack bolted. He sprinted through the maze of shelves, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. He could hear the figure behind him, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. When he reached the main floor, he saw Greg, or what was left of him. The man's lifeless body lay sprawled near the entrance, his face frozen in terror. Jack didn't stop. He ran to the security booth, fumbling for the emergency phone. The line was dead. The lights flickered violently, and the figure appeared again, this time closer. Its form was clearer now, tall, featureless, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Jack grabbed a metal pipe and swung it wildly. The figure didn't flinch. It simply raised an arm and the lights exploded, plunging the warehouse into darkness. Jack woke up outside, sprawled on the cold pavement. The sun was rising, casting an orange glow over the warehouse. Police cars surrounded the area, and paramedics were wheeling Greg's body into an ambulance. A detective approached Jack, his face grim. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "The security footage is strange." Jack asked to see the footage. On the screen, he saw himself running through the warehouse, swinging the pipe at thin air. There was no shadowy figure, no whispers, just him, panicking. The detective handed Jack a folder. "We found this in Section C," he said. Inside were the photographs. The faces were still scratched out, but one detail had changed. In the last photo, Jack was now standing next to the shadow. Jack quit the job that day, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the warehouse wasn't done with him. And that's the end of tonight's story. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe, and maybe think twice before taking the night shift.